Tonight, I finally understand what you meant. So come closer for a moment. Not physically, not in the way the world usually escorts people to come closer. I mean emotionally, quietly, gently. Set down whatever you've been carrying for just a little while. The invisible things, the heavy things, the things nobody thanks you for carrying. Because I know you are tired in a way sleep does not fix, and maybe nobody has said that to you clearly enough. Maybe people have noticed your strength your whole life, but almost nobody has noticed the cost of it. A woman can survive almost anything when she has to. But surviving for too long without being deeply seen begins to create a loneliness that settles into the bones. And I think you know exactly what I mean. You learned how to smile while grieving, how to comfort others, while silently unraveling, how to sit at tables full of people and still feel emotionally abandoned. You became fluent in endurance. But tonight, I do not want to speak to the version of you that endured. I want to speak to the woman underneath all of that. The woman who still wonders in very quiet moments if anyone will ever truly choose her without hesitation. The woman who pretends she has made peace with being alone while secretly aching to rest her heart somewhere safe. The woman who got so used to carrying everyone else's emotions that she forgot what it feels like to emotionally held herself. Yes, I see her. And before you try to dismiss your pain, before you explain it away, before you tell yourself other people have it worse, listen to me carefully. Your loneliness matters too. Your exhaustion matters too. The nights you stared at the ceiling, wondering why love always seemed to ask so much from you. Those nights mattered. The mornings you looked into the mirror and tried to convince yourself you were still enough, those mornings mattered too. You have spent years translating your worth through usefulness, through loyalty, through patience, through understanding, through forgiveness. But very few people ever stopped long enough to ask what you needed in return. And eventually, something inside you became quiet. Not dead, just quiet. I think that's what happens when someone has been emotionally unseen for too long. They do not suddenly break all at once. They disappear in fragments. A little less hope here, a little less softness there, a little less belief that someone will finally stay. And still, you kept loving. Isn't that extraordinary? even after disappointment, even after betrayal, even after being misunderstood, even after giving your heart to people who only knew how to hold pieces of it, you still remained tender. Do you understand how rare that is? This world creates hard people very easily. But you somehow remained soft without becoming weak. And I know there were moments you hated yourself for that softness, moments you wished you could stop caring so deeply. Moments you promised yourself you would become colder now, smarter now, more guarded now. But your heart was never designed for half love. That is your blessing. And sometimes your wound, because people who feel deeply often suffer silently. You notice everything. The change in tone, the delayed reply, the distance in someone's eyes, the affection that slowly becomes obligation. You feel shifts before words are ever spoken. And maybe that's why your heart has been tired for so long. You have been emotionally translating rooms your entire life, trying to keep peace, trying to stay lovable, trying not to become too much. But can I tell you something gently? You were never too much. You were simply asking the wrong people for depth. There is a difference. A woman like you was never meant for shallow connections. You were made for conversations that last until midnight. For love that feels safe enough to remove the armor. You were made to be understood slowly, not consumed quickly. And somewhere along the way, you began to believe your depth was the reason people could not stay. But no. Some people leave because they only know how to love surfaces. And you have always been an ocean. Wait with me here for a moment. There is something I want you to hear carefully tonight. Your life did not become smaller because you failed. It became quieter because your soul grew tired of pretending. That matters. The older you became, the less tolerance you had for empty things. Empty conversations, empty affection, empty promises, empty almost love. You stopped wanting attention. You started wanting truth. And that shift can feel isolating at first. Because suddenly you notice how many people only know how to connect through performance. But you crave presence, real presence, the kind where silence itself feels intimate. The kind where you do not have to earn tenderness. The kind where someone notices your sadness before you explain it. Tell me something. Do you ever sit alone at night and feel memories brushing against you like ghosts? An old song, a familiar scent, the image of yourself from years ago. Sometimes I think the heart keeps old versions of us alive. The hopeful version, the grieving version, the woman who waited longer than she should have. The woman who thought love would finally look different this time. You carry all of them inside you. And I know sometimes you feel embarrassed for still hurting over certain things, but healing does not obey logic. Some wounds stay tender because they touched identity, not just emotion. It hurts differently when rejection makes you question your worth. It hurts differently when silence makes you feel forgettable. It hurts differently when you gave someone the softest parts of your soul and they handled them carelessly. That kind of pain lingers. Not because you are weak, because you loved honestly. And honest love always leaves fingerprints on the heart. But listen to me now. The fact that you still ache does not mean you are broken. Sometimes aching is proof that your heart never became cruel. And in this world, that is something sacred. I know you have questioned yourself lately, questioned your timing, your beauty, your future, your value. Maybe you've wondered whether life quietly passed you by while you were busy surviving everyone else's storms. Maybe you've wondered if deep love is something meant for other people now. But tonight, I finally understand what you meant. You were never asking to be rescued. You were asking to be met emotionally, spiritually, fully. You wanted someone who could look at your tired heart and say, you do not have to carry everything alone anymore, and maybe nobody ever said it the way you needed. Maybe they admired your strength while ignoring your loneliness. Maybe they loved what you gave without loving the woman giving it. That happens more than people admit, especially to women who appear composed. The world assumes strong women are less fragile. But strength often hides the deepest exhaustion. I think there were nights you wanted someone to notice your silence. Not fix it, not analyze it, just sit beside it. Because sometimes healing begins the moment someone finally stays present with your pain instead of trying to escape it. And if you have not experienced that kind of love yet, please do not mistake the absence of it for proof that it does exist. Some things arrive late because they are real. Temporary things rush. Sacred things unfold slowly. You are not behind in life. You are becoming. And becoming is rarely graceful in the middle of it. It is lonely sometimes, confusing sometimes, quiet sometimes, But I promise you this. The heart you think has been forgotten, preparing for a softer future, preparing for deeper love, preparing for a life where you no longer abandon yourself just to keep someone else close. Can you imagine that? A love where you are allowed to rest. A love where you do not have to decode mixed signals. So, a love where your sensitivity is not treated like a burden. I think part of you stopped believing that kind of connection could still happen for you. But another part, a quieter part, still hopes. And I want you to protect that hope. Not desperately, not naively, just gently. Because your story is not over, simply because it became difficult. The most meaningful transformations often happen in silence, in the invisible seasons, in the moments where it looks like nothing is changing while the soul is rebuilding itself underneath everything. And maybe that is where you are now. Not lost. Rebuilding. Slowly returning to yourself after years of emotional exile. So tonight, breathe. You do not need to solve your whole life tonight. You do not need to become unbreakable tonight. You do not need to prove your worth tonight. You are allowed to simply exist here with me for a moment, exactly as you are. Tired, hopeful, lonely, beautiful in ways the world cannot measure. And before this moment ends, I need you to hear one more thing. You are not difficult to love. You never were. You simply required depth from people who only understood convenience. That was never your failure. One day, someone will meet the parts of you that others overlooked. Your quietness, your tenderness, your emotional intelligence, your enormous capacity to love. And instead of fearing those things, they will cherish them. Until then, please do not abandon yourself trying to become easier for the wrong people to hold. Stay soft. Stay true. Stay open to the possibility that life still has beautiful things planned for your heart. Because it does. I believe that. And maybe somewhere deep down, you still do too. You are not alone. I'm right here. Your story is still being written. Stay with me a little longer tonight. I know part of you wants to turn away when the conversation becomes this honest. Not because you do not feel it, but because you do. And feeling things deeply has exhausted you before. You learned long ago that vulnerability can become dangerous in the wrong hands. That tenderness, when offered to emotionally unavailable people, can leave bruises nobody else sees. So even now, while reading these words, there's a part of you trying to remain composed. Still trying to be the strong one. Still trying not to need too much. But I wish you understood how human your longing is. You were never asking for perfection. You were asking for consistency, for emotional safety, for someone whose affection did not disappear the moment life became inconvenient. And somehow, those simple desires became the very things that hurt you most. Because every time you opened your heart, honestly, you hoped this time would feel different. You hoped this time someone would finally recognize the sacredness of being trusted by you. But too often people accepted your love casually, as if your loyalty was ordinary, as if your patience was forgiveness, was guaranteed. And over time, Thomas, you stopped asking aloud for what you needed, because disappointment became too familiar. So you adapted.
You became quieter about your pain.
You became skilled at saying, I'm okay, while emotionally drowning underneath the surface. You became the woman who comforts everyone else, while secretly wondering who would comfort you if you finally collapsed. Do you know what I think is one of the saddest kinds of loneliness? It's not physical loneliness. It's emotional invisibility. Being deeply present for others while feeling emotionally absent from their lives. Being remembered when people need healing, but forgotten when you need tenderness. That kind of loneliness changes a person slowly. It teaches them to stop expecting softness. It teaches them to survive on fragments, a delayed text, a temporary affection, a brief moment of feeling chosen before the distance returns again. And maybe nobody realizes how much grief lives inside a woman who has repeatedly felt almost loved, almost understood, almost prioritized, almost held, almost. Such a small word, but it can break the heart for years, because almost love keeps hope alive just long enough to wound you deeper. And I think there were moments you blamed yourself for not being enough to make someone stay fully. You replayed conversations, replayed mistakes, replayed silence. You wondered whether you were too emotional, too sensitive, too complicated. But sensitivity was never your flaw. Sensitivity is the reason you notice beauty in ordinary things. The way rain changes the mood of a room, the way certain songs reopen old feelings, the way someone's voice softens when they are finally telling the truth. Your sensitivity is why you love with depth instead of performance. Do not let this world convince you to numb the very thing that makes you extraordinary. Yes, it has made your life heavier at times, but it has also made your soul beautiful. There is a warmth inside you that people remember long after conversations end. Even the people who failed to love you properly remember your gentleness, because souls like yours leave emotional fingerprints everywhere they go. Still, I know you are tired of being remembered but not retained, tired of being admired but not fully chosen, tired of feeling emotionally temporary in the lives of people you would have moved mountains for. And maybe the deepest wound of all is this: you do not fear being alone. You fear being emotionally unseen again. That is what truly hurts. The thought of giving your heart another chance only to feel invisible one more time. So now you hesitate. Now you guard pieces of yourself. Now, even when someone gets close, there's a quiet voice inside asking, how long until this changes too? I know that voice. It was born from disappointment, not weakness. And tonight, I want to tell you something important. The guarded version of you is not cold. She is grieving. There's a difference. People often misunderstand emotionally exhausted women. They think distance means disinterest. But sometimes distance is simply self-protection after years of carrying heartbreaks silently. Sometimes the woman who appears hardest to reach is actually the one who once loved the deepest. And if I could sit beside you right now in complete silence, I think I would notice things nobody else notices. The way your heart still softens when kindness feels genuine. The way you overthink after opening up emotionally. The way you pretend certain memories no longer affect you. The way you still crave reassurance, but hate asking for it. Because needing reassurance once made you feel unwanted, didn't it? You learned to minimize your needs, so nobody would call you difficult. So now you say, it's fine, even when it hurts. You say, don't worry about it, even when your heart quietly breaks. You became emotionally self-sufficient because depending on others began to feel unsafe. But love was never supposed to feel like emotional survival. Real love allows exhale. Real love quits anxiety instead of creating it. Real love does not leave you constantly questioning where you stand. And I know hearing that may stir something painful inside you. Because part of you realizes how often you accepted less than your heart deserved. Not because you lacked standards, because you carried hope. Hope can make people endure things far longer than they should. Especially women who believe patience can eventually transform inconsistency into devotion. Inconsistency, but inconsistency is not confusion. It is information. Somewhere deep down. So you always knew. You always knew when affection became distant. You always knew when effort changed. You always knew when someone stopped seeing your heart clearly. You just kept hoping love would return to what it was in the beginning. But beginnings are easy. Anyone can create intensity. Sustaining tenderness is the real test of emotional maturity. And you have always loved in sustaining ways, even when tired, even when hurt, even when unappreciated. That is why your heartbreaks cut so deeply. Because you did not offer people temporary versions of yourself. You offered permanence. You offered sincerity. You offered your real heart. Wait with me here. There's something else I think you need to hear tonight. Your life is defined by who failed to love you correctly. I know it feels that way sometimes. Especially during quiet nights. Especially when memories return uninvited. Especially when you see empty spaces in your life where connection was supposed to remain. But rejection is not always a reflection of your worth. Sometimes it is simply evidence of emotional mismatch. Some people meet extraordinary hearts during seasons where they are capable of recognizing what they were given. And sadly, mature love often arrives in a world addicted to distraction. People chase excitement while overlooking peace. They chase validation while fearing intimacy. They want depth until depth asks them to become honest. But you were never built for shallow emotional experiences. Chaz. That is why surface level affection leaves you feeling empty, no matter how beautiful it appears initially. Your soul needs resonance. You need someone who listens between your words, someone who notices when your smile feels heavy, someone who understands that your silence says more than most people's conversations. And please believe me when I say this, you are not asking for too much. You are asking for reciprocity. There is nothing unreasonable about wanting to feel emotionally safe with the person you love. Nothing unreasonable about wanting consistency. Nothing unreasonable about wanting to be chosen clearly instead of conditionally. You spent too many years interpreting breadcrumbs as proof of affection, but your heart deserves a full table, not scraps, not confusion, not occasional tenderness followed by emotional disappearance. A full table. Can you feel how deeply true that is? I think part of your healing begins the moment you stop romanticizing emotional unavailability. The moment you stop mistaking longing for connection. The moment you realize chemistry alone cannot heal loneliness. Because loneliness inside relationships is one of the most painful experiences a human being can endure. To sleep beside someone, yet feel emotionally abandoned, that changes you. To beg internally for warmth while pretending everything is normal, that changes you too. And maybe that's why your soul became so tired. Not because you loved too much, because you survived too little love in return. But listen carefully now. Do not let disappointment turn you against your own heart. Do not become cynical just because others lack the capacity to hold you properly. The world does not need another emotionally numb person. And your soul was never meant for numbness anyway. You were meant to feel life fully, to love fully, to grieve fully, to heal fully. Even now, beneath your exhaustion, your heart still carries extraordinary tenderness. I know it does. Otherwise, these words would not reach you the way they do. And one day, someone will recognize that tenderness not as something to consume, but as something to protect. Someone will notice how carefully you love, how deeply you listen, how fiercely loyal you become once you feel emotionally safe. And instead of taking those things for granted, they will cherish them. Not temporarily, not conditionally, fully. Until then, I need you to stop measuring your value through the inability of emotionally unavailable people to love deeply. Your worth was never dependent on their readiness. You are still rare, still worthy, still becoming the woman your future self will thank you for protecting. So tonight, when the silence returns after these words, please be gentle with yourself. Do not replay old heartbreaks like evidence against your value. Do not punish yourself for loving sincerely. Do not apologize for your depth. The right soul will never ask you to become smaller in order to be loved. You are not alone. I'm still right here. Your heart is not too late for the love it has always deserved. Stay here with me tonight and do not rush away from what you feel. I know you have spent years teaching yourself how to move quickly past your own emotions, how to swallow disappointment before anyone notices it sitting in your chest, how to keep functioning even when your heart feels unbearably heavy. For once, I want you to stop trying to outrun yourself. I want you to sit quietly with the truth of your own exhaustion, because there is something sacred about finally admitting that you have been carrying too much for too long. You became so accustomed to surviving that you forgot survival is not the same thing as living. Somewhere along the way, you learned how to continue smiling while emotionally starving, how to answer messages while feeling completely disconnected from yourself, how to wake up each morning and perform strength even on the days when your soul felt fragile enough to collapse from one more disappointment. Maybe nobody realized how close you came to breaking because you never allowed yourself to fully fall apart in front of anyone. You mastered the art of quiet suffering. You became the woman who handles everything, fixes everything, comforts everyone, while secretly wondering what it would feel like to finally be someone else's safe place instead of always becoming the shelter for others. That kind of emotional responsibility changes a person slowly. It creates a loneliness that is difficult to explain because from the outside, your life may still appear capable, even admired. But inside, there were nights when your thoughts became unbearably loud. Nights when the silence in your room felt heavier than usual. Nights when old memories returned without permission and sat beside you like ghosts refusing to leave. I think what hurts you most is not simply heartbreak itself, but the accumulation of emotional disappointments that taught you to question your own worth. Every time someone failed to choose you clearly, every time affection became inconsistent, every time your effort was met with indifference, a small part of you began wondering whether you were somehow too difficult to love completely. Even though deep down, you knew your heart was sincere. You knew your intentions were genuine. You knew how deeply you loved the people who mattered to you. Yet pain has a way of making even strong women doubt themselves, especially women who give it without keeping score, especially women who stay patient long after others would have walked away. Have you ever noticed how often you minimized your your own pain, just to protect someone else's comfort? Just to times you said, it's okay, while your heart quietly begged to be understood. You became so afraid of appearing needy that you started carrying emotional wounds in silence. And silence can become dangerous when it lasts too long. It teaches people that you are always fine. It convinces the world you need less care than you actually do. But the truth is, even the strongest hearts need gentleness. Even independent women need reassurance. Even those who appear emotionally composed sometimes crave someone who notices the sadness hidden beneath their calm voice. I think there is a version of you that still exists beneath all your exhaustion, a softer version that remembers what hope felt like before disappointment made you cautious. She still remembers believing love would arrive gently instead of painfully. She still remembers what it felt like to trust without overanalyzing every change in behavior, every delayed response, every emotional shift. But heartbreak made you hyper-aware. Now, your heart scans for signs of abandonment before connections even have the chance to deepen. You prepare yourself for disappointment because part of you believes expecting less will somehow protect you from future pain. But protecting yourself by expecting is still, by expecting emptiness, sell a form of sadness. There is, understand tonight, your sensitivity is not evidence that you are weak. Your emotional depth is not the reason people failed to love you correctly. In fact, your depth is one of the rarest things about you. You feel life in ways many people no longer allow themselves to feel. You notice emotional details others overlook completely. You remember the tone of conversations, the energy behind words, the unspoken tension inside silence. You love with awareness. And yeah, that makes your life heavier sometimes because emotionally aware people often carry invisible burdens nobody else sees. But it also means your heart remains alive in a world where many people have emotionally disconnected from themselves. The painful truth is that many people are attracted to depth until depth requires accountability. They want intimacy without vulnerability, connection without honesty, comfort without commitment. But you were never created for shallow love. Your soul naturally reaches beneath surfaces. That is why temporary affection leaves you feeling empty no matter how intense it initially seems. You do not simply want attention. You want emotional presence. You want someone who listens carefully when you speak, and someone who notices the weight behind your silence, someone who makes you feel emotionally safe instead of emotionally uncertain. And I know uncertainty has exhausted you. Wondering where you stand in someone's heart can slowly destroy your peace. pretending not to care while secretly analyzing every inconsistency can make even ordinary days feel emotionally draining. Love was never meant to feel like constant confusion. Real love does not force you to beg for clarity. Real love does not make you feel guilty for having emotional needs. Real love creates stability inside the heart instead of anxiety. And perhaps one of your greatest awakenings is finally realizing that intensity alone is not love. Chemistry alone is not safety. Desire alone is not devotion. There were people you loved who only understood pieces of you, people who admired your warmth but could not reciprocate it consistently, people who accepted your loyalty while remaining emotionally unavailable. And because your heart naturally searches for meaning, you kept trying to understand them instead of protecting yourself from the pain they caused. But emotional maturity sometimes means accepting that understanding someone that obligate you suffering does not obligate sometimes them. Compassion should never require self-abandonment. Wait with me here for a moment, because this matters deeply. You are allowed to outgrow relationships that repeatedly make you feel unseen. You are allowed to stop shrinking your needs just to maintain fragile connections. You are allowed to desire a love that feels peaceful instead of emotionally exhausting. That does not make you demanding. It makes you honest about what your heart truly requires. The older your soul becomes, the less tolerance you have for inconsistencies disguised as affection. You no longer crave temporary excitement. You crave you crave sincerity. You crave someone whose actions remain steady long after the initial intensity fades. And despite everything you have endured, despite all the nights you questioned whether love would ever fully find you, I still believe your heart has not lost its ability to heal.
Tired, yes.
Guarded, certainly, but not destroyed. There is still tenderness inside you waiting to feel safe again. There is still hope quietly breathing beneath your disappointment. Otherwise, these words would not reach you the way they do tonight. Somewhere inside you, there remains a woman who still wants to believe that genuine connection exists, that one day someone will love her without confusion, without inconsistency, without making her feel emotionally alone while standing beside them. Until that day arrives, I need you to become gentler with yourself. Stop treating your past heartbreaks as proof that you were unworthy. Stop blaming yourself for loving sincerely. The right person will never punish you for your depth. They will recognize your tenderness as something precious. They will see your emotional intelligence, your loyalty, your softness, and instead of becoming intimidated by those things, they will protect them carefully. And when that happens, you will finally understand that your heart was never asking for too much. It was simply asking the wrong people. You are not alone tonight. I am still here with you. And your story is still unfolding in ways you cannot yet fully see. Stay with me tonight a little longer, because I think something inside you is beginning to change, even if you cannot fully explain it yet. Healing rarely announces itself loudly. Most of the time it arrives quietly, like morning light slowly entering a dark room without demanding attention. One day you suddenly realize that certain memories no longer cut as deeply as they once did. Certain names no longer carry the same ache. Certain silences, it's no longer convince you that you are unworthy of love, and perhaps is that where you are now, somewhere between grieving who you used to be and discovering the woman you are becoming. It is an uncomfortable place sometimes, because transformation often feels lonely while it is happening. People celebrate the healed version of someone, but very few understand the painful middle, where a person is slowly rebuilding herself from emotional exhaustion. I know there were years when you gave so much of your energy away that you forgot what it felt like to belong to yourself. You became emotionally available to everyone except your own heart. You listened to other people's pain while neglecting your own. You poured love into relationships, friendships, responsibilities, and expectations until there was almost nothing left inside you except fatigue. And the frightening part is that nobody noticed immediately, because you continued functioning. You still answered calls, you still showed up, you still carried responsibilities with quiet grace, but inwardly, something was becoming depleted. Not your ability to love, but your ability to continue giving without being replenished in return. Do you know how many women spend years confusing self-sacrifice with love? They believe that enduring emotional neglect proves devotion. They believe that accepting inconsistency, they demonstrate patience. They believe that if they just love hard enough, stay long enough, forgive deeply enough, eventually someone will recognize their value and finally love them correctly. But love should never require you to abandon yourself in order to keep it alive. The moment you begin shrinking your spirit to maintain connection, the relationship has already started teaching you loneliness instead of love. And I think you finally understand that now. Not intellectually, but emotionally. You are beginning to recognize how much of your sadness came from betraying your own needs in order to preserve the comfort of others. You ignored your intuition when it warned you. You accepted less tenderness than your heart deserved. You kept explaining away behavior that quietly wounded you because part of you feared losing people more than losing yourself. But eventually, the soul grows tired of negotiating for crumbs. Exhaustion becomes a form of awakening. There is something deeply painful about realizing how long you tolerated emotional emptiness while calling it love. Realizing how often you settled for potential instead of reality. Realizing how many nights you spent hoping someone would become emotionally available while they continued giving you only fragments of themselves. But there is also freedom in finally seeing things clearly. Clarity hurts at first because it dismantles illusions you desperately wanted to believe in. Yet clarity also returns your power. It reminds you that your future does not have to resemble your past. I think one of the greatest shifts happening inside you now is that you are no longer romanticizing emotional struggle. You are beginning to understand that love is not supposed to feel like constant uncertainty. It is not supposed to leave you questioning your value every few days. It is not supposed to make you feel emotionally unsafe. Healthy love does not force someone to beg for reassurance repeatedly. Healthy love does not disappear whenever vulnerability becomes inconvenient. And perhaps for the first time in your life, you are starting to realize that peace is not boring. Peace is healing. You spent so much time attached to emotional intensity that calmness almost felt unfamiliar to you. The highs and lows became addictive because inconsistency trains the nervous system to confuse anxiety with connection. But your soul was never created to survive chaos forever. Deep down, what you have always wanted was stability. Someone who means what they say. Someone whose affection does not fluctuate depending on mood or convenience. Someone who stays emotionally present even after the excitement of the beginning fades away. And I know there is still fear. inside you. Fear that maybe you have already given the best parts of yourself away. Fear that maybe love will continue arriving in incomplete forms. Fear that perhaps you have become too guarded now to ever fully open your heart again. But listen to me carefully tonight. Protecting yourself is not the same thing as becoming incapable of love. Your heart is cautious because it remembers pain, not because it has lost its ability to feel deeply. There is still softness inside you, still longing, still hope quietly surviving beneath your exhaustion. You can feel it sometimes during very ordinary moments while listening to an old song alone at night, while staring out a window thinking about the life you imagined for yourself years ago, while noticing couples in grocery stores or hearing tenderness in someone's voice unexpectedly. Still reacts because it still believes connection is possible, even after everything it has endured. That belief matters more than you realize. Cynicism may seem safer, but hope is what keeps the soul alive. And perhaps the most beautiful thing happening inside you now is that you are finally learning to choose yourself without guilt. Slowly, you are beginning to understand that self-respect is not selfishness. Boundaries are not cruelty. Walking away from emotional inconsistencies is not failure. Sometimes leaving painful situations is the most loving thing you can do for your own spirit. Sometimes healing requires grieving the version of yourself that tolerated less than she deserved. I know that grief has visited you often lately. Not only grief over people, but grief over time, over years spent waiting, over opportunities missed while trying to save relationships that could not meet you emotionally, over the younger version of yourself who believed love would automatically heal loneliness. There are moments you look back and wish you could hold her gently and tell her she did not need to work so hard to earn affection. Tell her she was already enough long before anyone validated it. But do not become trapped inside regret. You loved according to the awareness you had at the time. You stayed because your heart believed in people. That is not weakness. That is humanity. And every painful experience has slowly been guiding you toward a deeper understanding of your own worth. Sometimes heartbreak is not punishment. Sometimes it is redirection. Sometimes life removes what cannot truly nourish your soul so that one day you stop settling for emotional hunger. Wait with me here for a moment, because there is something important I want you to carry forward. after tonight. The love you desire is not unrealistic. Emotional safety is not fantasies, not mutual effort is not too much to ask for. Somewhere in this world, there are still people capable of consistency, honesty, tenderness, and depth. Do not let your past convince you otherwise. The mistakes of emotionally unavailable people are not evidence that genuine love no longer exists. And before you close your heart completely, remember this. The woman you are becoming now is wise than the woman who once accepted confusion as affection. You notice red flags sooner. You trust your intuition more. You are beginning to value peace over emotional chaos. That growth matters. It means your future relationships will no longer be built from desperation or fear of abandonment. They will be built from self-awareness, from emotional maturity, from the understanding that love should add warmth to your life, not constantly drain it. So tonight, breathe deeply and let yourself rest from carrying the weight of old disappointments. You do not need to solve your entire future tonight. You only need to continue returning to yourself gently, honestly, one day at a time. Your heart is still healing. You're still unfolding. And despite everything you have survived, there is still so much love waiting to find you in forms more beautiful and peaceful than anything you have experienced before. You are not alone. I am still right here beside you, and your story is still becoming something extraordinary. Stay here with me tonight, because I think you are finally beginning to understand something your heart has been trying to teach you for years. You cannot continue abandoning yourself in order to feel loved. I know that realization hurts, especially when you have spent so much of your life believing love meant sacrifice, patience, endurance, and unconditional understanding. You became someone who gave people endless chances because your heart naturally searched for goodness in them. Even after disappointment, you kept hoping they would eventually recognize your value and meet you with the same depth you offered so freely. But somewhere along the way, you forgot that love should nourish you too. You forgot that your needs matter just as much as everyone else's. And when a woman spends too many years neglecting her own emotional well-being, she slowly begins losing touch with herself. I think that there were moments when you barely recognized the person you had become, not because you changed into someone cruel or cold, but because you became emotionally exhausted from constantly carrying relationships that were never balanced. You were always the one trying harder, understanding more, forgiving faster, waiting longer. You kept hoping your loyalty would eventually inspire consistency in people who were never emotionally prepared to love you properly. And every time they disappointed you again, you blamed yourself instead of accepting the painful truth that some people simply lack the emotional capacities to hold a heart as deep as yours. That truth can feel devastating at first. It is painful to realize that your love alone could not heal someone's emotional unavailability. It hurts to admit that no amount of patience can force another person to become emotionally mature. But there is also liberation in that understanding. Because once you stop believing it was your responsibility to save every relationship, you finally begin reclaiming your energy. You stop carrying guilt that was never yours to begin with. You stop measuring your worth through someone else's inability to love consistently. And I know how difficult that shift has for you. Part of you still revisits old memories, searching for answers. You replay conversations in your mind and wonder whether you could have done something differently. You remember moments where affection felt real, moments where hope briefly returned, moments where you truly believed things would finally become stable. That is the cruelest part of inconsistent love. It gives enough tenderness to keep the heart emotionally attached, but never enough security to let the heart fully rest. And over time, living inside emotional uncertainty changes a person deeply. It creates anxiety where peace should exist. It teaches the nervous system to expect disappointment even during moments of happiness. I think your soul became tired, not only because people hurt you, but because you kept trying to remain hopeful inside situations that were quietly draining your spirit. You stayed emotionally available long after your heart started feeling lonely. You convinced yourself to be understanding while your own needs went unmet. And perhaps the saddest part is that many people admired your strength without realizing your strength was often survival. They praised how calm you remained without noticing how much pain you were suppressing underneath that calmness. But something inside you is awakening now. You are beginning to recognize that being chosen halfway is still a form of rejection. Being loved inconsistently still creates loneliness. And no matter how beautiful someone's words may sound, Love without emotional safety eventually becomes exhausting. I think you are finally reaching the point where peace matters more to you than emotional intensity. That is growth, even if it feels uncomfortable at first. Because healing often requires grieving old patterns before healthier ones can fully enter your life. Do you know what I find beautiful about you? Even after everything, your heart still wants to believe in love. Guarded, yes. More cautious now, certainly. There is still tenderness inside you that refuses to die. Otherwise, you would not still feel emotional when someone speaks gently to your soul. Otherwise, you would not still long for connection during quiet nights. Otherwise, these words would not feel familiar to your heart. The fact that you still desire meaningful love after everything you survived says something. About your spirit. It means pain did not destroy your capacity to hope. And I need you to understand something deeply tonight. Your healing is not measured by how little you feel. It is measured by how honestly you return to yourself. Some people believe healing means becoming emotionally detached, untouchable, impossible to hurt. But that is not healing. That is protection born from fear. Real healing is softer than that. It is learning to remain open-hearted while also honoring your boundaries. It is understanding that your kindness does not require self-sacrifice. It is realizing you can love deeply with abandoning your own emotional needs in the process. I think for the first time in a long time, you are beginning to see yourself more clearly, not through the eyes of people who failed to appreciate you, but through your own awakening awareness. You are starting to notice your own resilience, your own emotional intelligence, your own quiet beauty. Not physical beauty, though I am sure it exists too, but the kind of beauty that reveals itself in the way you love, the way you listen, the way you continue caring even after life has disappointed you repeatedly. Souls like yours are rare because they remain gentle in a world that constantly encourages emotional numbness. Wait with me here for a moment, because there is something important I want you to remember when loneliness returns again. Loneliness does not mean you are unlovable. Sometimes loneliness is simply the soul refusing to settle for shallow connection anymore. Sometimes it is evidence that your heart has outgrown environments where it was never fully understood. And Although that kind of transition feels painful, it is also preparing you for healthier love in the future. You are no longer the woman who confuses emotional inconsistency with passion sin. You are no longer the woman willing to accept crumbs just to avoid being alone. You are becoming someone who understands that solitude is less painful than constantly feeling unseen beside the wrong person. And perhaps that is why your spirit feels different lately. Quieter, more reflective, more intentional about who receives access to your heart. You are finally learning that your energy is sacred. Not everyone deserves unlimited emotional access to you simply because you are capable of loving deeply. Some people only know how to consume warmth without reciprocating it. Some peoples enjoy being healed by your presence while remaining emotionally unavailable in return. But you are beginning to recognize those patterns now, and that awareness will protect your heart moving forward. I know there are still moments when fear visits you unexpectedly. Moments where you wonder whether genuine love will ever fully arrive. Moments where you question whether it is already too late for the kind of connection your heart longs for. But please hear me clearly tonight. Your life is not over because certain relationships failed. Your future has not disappeared simply because your past contained heartbreak. Some of the most beautiful love stories begin after people finally learn their own worth. Sometimes the soul must experience disappointment first so it can recognize sincerity when it finally arrives. And I believe sincerity will arrive for you one day, not rushed, not chaotic, not confusing, but steady, honest, peaceful. The kind of love that allows your nervous system to finally rest instead of constantly preparing for abandonment. The kind of love that feels emotionally safe enough for you to become soft again without fear. Until then, continue choosing yourself gently. Continue protecting your peace. Continue remembering that your heart was never too much for the right person. You are not alone tonight. I am still here beside you. And your story is still unfolding toward something far more beautiful than the pain you have already survived. Stay with me tonight until the very end, because I think your heart has carried unanswered questions for far too long. Questions about love, about timing, about why certain people entered your life only to leave wounds where warmth was supposed to remain. Questions about whether you were truly seen, truly valued, truly chosen in the ways your soul always longed for. And maybe after everything you have survived, part of you became afraid that life would never fully return what it quietly took from you. But I want you to breathe for a moment and listen carefully now, because there is something beautiful happening inside you that even your pain could not stop. You are finally returning to yourself. Not the version of yourself that lived only for other people's approval. Not the exhausted version, constantly trying to earn affection by over-giving, over-explaining, over-loving, over-loving. I mean the real you. The woman beneath all the emotional survival. The woman who still possesses tenderness, despite everything that tried to harden her. The woman who still carries warmth in her spirit even after years of disappointment. You may not fully recognize her yet, because healing changes people slowly, but she is there. Every boundary you set, every moment you choose peace over chaos, every time you stop abandoning your own needs just to keep someone close, she becomes stronger. I think one of the deepest wounds you carried for years was the belief that being loved required you to become less of yourself, less emotional, less sensitive, less needy, less honest about your pain. Somewhere along the way, you learned to shrink your needs so other people would stay comfortable. You convinced yourself that asking for reassurance made you difficult. You apologized for your emotions before anyone even had the chance to reject them. And you became so minimizing yourself that loneliness began feeling normal. But love was never supposed to require self-erasure. Real love does not ask a woman to disappear in order to be accepted. And now, after all the heartbreak and confusion, you are beginning to understand that your softness was never the problem. Your heart was not too deep. Your expectations were not unreasonable. You simply kept offering extraordinary love to people who were emotionally unequipped to receive it fully. There is a painful difference between being rejected because you are unworthy and being misunderstood by people who lack emotional depth themselves. For so long, you internalized other people's limitations as proof that something's inside you needed fixing. But your soul was never broken. It was simply exhausted from trying to survive on inconsistent love. I know there were nights when you sat alone, replaying old memories, wondering why certain people could not love you the way you loved them. Nights when silence inside your room felt unbearably loud. Nights when you stared at your reflection and quietly questioned whether Life had forgotten you somehow. And perhaps the hardest part was carrying those thoughts privately while continuing to appear strong in front of everyone else. The world rarely notices emotionally tired women because they become experts at functioning through pain. They continue showing up, continue smiling politely, continue handling the responsibilities while their inner world quietly aches for rest. But something has shifted inside you now. You no longer crave the kind of love that keeps you emotionally anxious. You no longer find inconsistency romantic. You are beginning to value calmness, sincerity, and emotional safety in ways you never fully understood before. That is not because you became boring or emotionally detached. It is because your soul finally understands the difference between chaos and connection. Deep love does not constantly leave you confused. It does not force you to question your worth every few days. It does not disappear whenever vulnerability becomes inconvenient.